economic problems in 2011, you know?
What, current year or around this time?
Around this time, you know?
Well, I think the problems remain essentially the old ones, which is how to sustain a minimum rate of growth, which minimum is now going up quite rapidly. How to convert that growth into something which matters to people.
Employment.
It's not just employment, it is better standard of living, better health, better education. And to do all of this without doing too much damage either to natural resources or to the social fabric. Again, that I would say is now within this, certain things which we tend to damage are, for example, what we just said. I mean, we've had very high inflation for the last 3 years or so, and this sort of a rate of inflation is simply not sustainable, nor is it acceptable. In fact, the reason it's not sustainable is because people will not tolerate it. Similarly, we have seen a lot of concern of people regarding corruption. And some of this has been linked with the fact that, suddenly there are all these resources which are now being eyed by too many people. Whether it's spectrum, whether it's land, whether it's this or that. And so there is a feeling that, somehow a lot of things which belong to the future are being capitalized today and being passed off to people. I mean, this is what people are worried about. And I think that is also not sustainable.
So you mentioned 3 or 4 things. One is how to sustain high growth rate. 2, how to do it without, how to have that growth rate affect quality of life of people. 3 is how to control prices. 4th is corruption. 5th is not to disrupt the natural resources or the social fabric. Is that? So what are the solutions? How do we go about achieving these 5 things?
Well, the first one, which is to maintain the rate of growth, is at one level more possible now than it has been ever before. Simply because our savings rates are now high, our investment savings rates are, in the neighborhood of 35-36%, which should normally, on the basis of usual growth calculations, allow you to have 8 to 9% growth. However, the other ones are far more complicated. And the matter, for example, of this translating itself into what we in the Planning Commission have called inclusive growth requires that the state, by state I mean both the state governments and the central governments, have a clear policy that there are some priorities, and these priorities are to do with a minimum provision to all of certain things. And we had set up some monitorable targets. Unfortunately, a lot of them will not be met in the 11th plan, which, with regard to things like, health, education, and the gamut of all of these things, there were clear targets set. And I think we need to continue to do that and ensure that enough adequate resources are there, but it needs more than resources. It needs a commitment, it needs an architecture, and it needs people to act together. As far as the sustainability of nature is concerned, this is something we simply cannot afford to neglect. We are running into shortages of all sorts of things. I mean, part of the reason for corruption is people are looking at future shortages and immediately jumping in to try and grab a lot of this. And I think the only way you actually solve problems of water, land, climate change possibly. All of this is really by improving efficiency of resource use. I mean, it is really a matter of getting efficiency down. And therefore, I think we have to actually concentrate far more than we have done before on bringing knowledge, bringing problem solving, and a single-minded attitude in decision-making units that we have to actually go for efficiency. Okay? As far as corruption goes, as I said, part of it is because we are running into shortages, so certain things become expensive or potentially expensive and huge profits are seen. But there's another reason for corruption. And that reason is that there is now a lot of money which is floating around, which is outsized compared to the monitoring mechanisms that we have, or the auditing mechanisms that we have. And obviously you have to put in audit and monitoring into its place. And some of this has to happen from outside government. I mean, in any case it is, but I think government must recognize it and have platforms on which that can take place. And finally, I think the issue of inflation, which hopefully is a relatively short-run issue.
But 9% inflation for 3 years is very...
Yeah, it is unacceptable, as I said. But on the other hand, I hope it is short-run because we've been through a very, very unusual turbulent period. There was a world recession. As a result of the world recession, and a necessary outcome of that was much more expenditure, much more printing of money, both within the country but much more outside. This has an effect on the amount of money floating around. Then we had a drought, and we are now in a situation where the world is still not quite recovered from that recession, and there's a lot of there's a lot of money still being printed. So some of this may be temporary. But I think what is to be watched, and it may not be temporary, are imbalances between the different sectors. One of the things we've seen is inflation has been worse in the food sector. And we have to ensure that, that output grows adequately, and that we have things like a proper stock management and police policy. Unfortunately, on the stock side, we've been building stocks when we should have been reducing them.
Okay. Fine. So now we have understood the problems and some amount of solution. What are the challenges in arriving at these solutions?
See, the challenges are what I suppose the 12th plan will be looking into. We've started the exercise. It's a fairly cumbersome exercise because, different divisions, different departments, they all have their working papers and they're brought around and things. But I think this time around, the Planning Commission has gone about trying to listen more carefully to what others have to say. And then it is being put to all the working groups. Maybe what will come out is not that different from what they've come out in previous plans. That would be not a very good thing to happen. But by and large, I think it is clear that we've got to focus even more on particularly on the areas where we should have done much better long ago. Agriculture, health, education, and we also need to get far greater synergy between what the government does and what the private sector does. And by the private sector, I don't simply mean the corporate sector, but by those outside government. And because that's where a lot of the investment lies, that is where a lot of the energy lies, and that is where I think the demands are coming from.